Hello my friends, I'm Kayla and this is my July wrap up. Here are my reading stats for the month, how many pages I read, audiobook versus physical book, ratings, genres, all of that stuff is here. And now I'm going to talk to you about the 19 things that I read in July. This is the weird point in the year where I'm starting to like lie to you, or I could lie to you and say I read 19 books this month. I didn't. I read like 26 books this month. And this is going to continue to be a trend throughout the rest of the year when I say I read this many books. I actually read more, but I have so many videos that I'm working on that aren't ready to come out yet. There's one you won't see until December by design. There's one you won't see until like September just because it's taking me longer than I thought. There's one I have no idea when you're going to see because I'm standing in solidarity with the writer's strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike, and I'm not talking about any media, but I have a fun video in the works that I'm sure you'll see one day. But I still have 19 things to talk about, so plenty of stuff. And this isn't the order that I'm going to talk about them in. In fact, the order is just going to be decided by your comments, because if you don't follow me on Instagram, do that, because I often ask if you have any questions related to specific books, and that's like, are there plot things you want to know I didn't cover in the vlogs, or is there like a fun way that you want me to talk about these books? And you left a lot of comments like, pick a book that represents this, pick a book that you would answer this, that would be the answer to this question. So I'm just going to scroll through these comments and that's what's going to decide what book I talk about. The first one is, have you finally found a 5-star horror? If you have been following along, it's been a struggle this year, and I did read a couple horror books this month. And I did end up with a horror that's 5 stars, but it doesn't totally fit in the horror genre, I don't think. But we'll grab that. It's actually right at the end, and that's Chlorine by Jade Song. This is a literary coming of age story as well, but it's definitely grotesque and off-putting and gives those horror vibes. We have this teenage girl who believes she's a mermaid. She's on the swim team and she's experiencing a lot of pressure from herself, teammates, coaches, and she just loves swimming and being in the water so much that she decides she's a mermaid, and that involves a lot of just like disgusting kind of imagery and what's the word? Mutilation rather. And it reminded me of reading Black Girl Unlimited and the idea that somebody believes they are a wizard, they have these magical powers, but it is rooted in like mental health, trauma, and it's not like creature horror necessarily. This was disturbing and I wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but I just thought it was so interesting, and it's the type of story that I just really love, so I gave it 5 stars. One of my only 2 5 stars, brand new 5 stars of the entire month. I did do one reread. Next is, which book pushed you out of your comfort zone the most? And this is interesting to think about, because I wouldn't say anything here is like a genre or a vibe or a story that I've absolutely never read before, would never pick up. But the fact is that there are 6 books here that I didn't select for myself, that were chosen completely without knowing what they even were. I read books that I'd never heard of. I think the one that I would pick from the stack, if it's for that, is Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. It is nonfiction and it's about an interesting topic, which is why it was selected for me. It's about taxonomy and organization and categorization, but it is more about this man in history, and I do not read like biographies ever. So in that way, I would say it pushed me outside of my comfort zone, because I was just reading about this guy's like life journey and him collecting fish and naming them and then going through hardships. But then also you learn that he was just like a terrible person. That Lulu Miller discovers through her own, like this is her memoir also, and how she learned from this guy, how she learned the things that she didn't support about him, and just her own journey and reflecting on her life. It is like kind of the vibe of things I've read before, but also was so outside of that I would say it pushed me outside my comfort zone most. I gave it a 4. I think it was interesting at the end of the day. Well written, well paced, but I really did not know what I was getting into. Oh, this one's a 4-parter. It's, what book would you recommend to 1, your mom, 2, Rob, 3, a general reader, and 4, your enemy? Okay, I think the one that I would recommend most to my mom, specifically my mom, what she likes to read, and also just like her age group, it's The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I think this is a really addicting thriller with so many twists that even if you figure out 3 or 4, the other 10 will catch you off guard. I just did a live show for this. It was literally did book club pick for July, and I said in it that this is going to be my most recommended Riley Sager going forward. I think it has the most mass appeal. I think it doesn't go too outside the box and weird, but it still has a lot of surprising elements. So in it, we're following Kit, who is becoming a caretaker for this elderly woman who is in a wheelchair, and she has this rumor surrounding her that she murdered her entire family like 50 plus years ago. So there's a mystery involving that and Kit trying to figure out what actually happened. And she gets to figure that out because half of the book is written from Lenora Hope, that woman who supposedly murdered her entire family. It's her writing on a typewriter that's how she's able to communicate with Kit. And it's her like revealing everything. It's her tell all. She wants to expose everything that went on. It was pretty ridiculous. Like everything is one of those suspend your disbelief. Everything's really convenient to pull off all of these different reveals that are just really fun. I gave it a 4-star at the end of the day. Some things were just a little too much, went a little like too far, or I didn't need to be in here to enjoy it. So my 4 is a solid one. I think it's in my like 3rd position or 4th position as favorite Riley Sager. It goes Lock Every Door, The House Across the Lake, Home Before Dark, and then this one, I think. But it and Home Before Dark are pretty much on the same level. The one I would recommend to Rob, I really don't think there's anything here, honestly. Like, I think he'd be more interested in the fantasy ones, but they're too long. Like, I know he would never finish them. I don't think he'd be into short story collections. I don't think he'd be into the romance. I don't think he'd be into the slower horror. So I'm gonna go with Murder is a Piece of Cake because it's just a simple kind of mystery, and he's never read a cozy mystery. And if I were to recommend him a cozy mystery of anything, I mean, it's not going to be Bones and the Begonias, even though I feel like he has already read it because I told him the whole plot of it in my latest video. But I'm going to say this one because it is interesting enough, and there's a dog. So this is by Valerie Burns. It's the 2nd book in the Baker Street mystery series, where this woman is leaving her life behind in the big city, moving to a small town where her family is originally from, and she inherits this bakery. And then the bakery across the street, who's like seen as her competitor, the owner drops dead, and people think it's her. So before she is implicated by the police, she needs to solve the mystery for herself, and she does just that. It gives exactly what a cozy mystery should. I gave it 3 stars. I might be done with cozy mystery sequels at this point, unless I decide to read one more in the Bones and Begonias one. Okay, a general reader is interesting if I have to recommend something to a general reader, because I think like what has the most mass appeal, but I am gonna go with like if you're a general reader who reads general fiction. I think I just feel like The Wedding Season would be a pretty easy one to recommend. I wouldn't have to worry about who I was recommending this to. It's by Katie Birchall, and it's just a women's fiction kind of story about this woman who is recently left at the altar essentially by her fiance, and she is having a lot of self-worth naturally concerns, and also like if she is an interesting person, if she has an exciting life, if she is worthy of love. And she also just needs to branch out and find a new life for herself, because you know your life is so tied to the person that you're in a romantic relationship with a lot of the time, and she needs to branch out. And her friends give her this list of tasks to complete at all the weddings she has to go to throughout the summer, and it's just like a good wholesome story. It has good messaging, it has likable characters, there's a little bit of romance that you get to enjoy that she enters into. You get to see her moving on and thriving, and I just wouldn't really hesitate to recommend this to people who already read this genre. I don't think it's going to be anybody's like new favorite book of all time. I gave it probably a 3.75. It's got very good for her energy, not in the revenge way that we often use that phrase, but just in the you get to see her thrive, and it has good vibes. Now, one that I would recommend for my enemy, I mean, I don't know, because there's a couple books here that I gave a low rating, but I don't think they're objectively bad. And if I recommended it to my enemy, like maybe they would love it because we read different genres. So I think it's gotta be Bones and the Begonias by Dale Meyer, because this is like objectively not a good book. It's not a good mystery. It's not that interesting. The only reason I have fun with this series is because I get to tell you the entire like stupid plot as I'm reading it, and it's set where I live, which gives me a sense of joy, I guess, even though it barely has any description of where I live. But in it, we're following Doreen, and she is just leaving her husband. She lives in Kelowna now, and she inherits this house from her grandmother, and she keeps finding like dead bodies or the bones of dead bodies. There's just clues everywhere. And in each book, as a cozy mystery goes, she's gonna solve the crime. Sometimes when an amateur sleuth is solving the crime, it's because they are really smart and they can figure everything out, and they should be inserting themselves into these investigations because they have a skill set they didn't realize that they had. That's not Doreen. Doreen just comes up with these like wild scenarios and then just asks somebody if that's true, and then they confess. It was a 2-star. All of my enemies should read that. Next comment is, what's a book you wish you had read sooner? And I think that's really fun. I'm gonna go with this one because I did give it a high rating, and I feel like if I read Do You Dream of Terra 2 by Temi O back a couple years ago when I was reading a ton of YA sci-fi, and especially ones that involved groups of teens traveling to space and a competition of sorts, this would have definitely ended up in my lists of like most recommended ones that I think you need to pick up if you love space books that aren't too like spacey, alien, other planet stuff. It all takes place on this ship, and it's very character driven. It's a long one. You get to know all of the teens who were chosen for this mission. You follow them for a good amount of their training too, which is super fun, and then the actual takeoff. And as they're traveling through space, they are going to Terra 2, which is, you know, like another Earth, and they're going to start a whole new society there. So there's all of these morality conversations and plans and what they want for their future, what they want for this new planet that they get to build. But then as they're traveling, things are going wrong with other people, you know, illness, a fight for power, just the things you traditionally expect. And then also the ship like has issues and they have to fix it, and they have to think through all these logistics. There was romance, there was friendship, there was enemies, there was mutiny, and this was pulled out of my members TBR jar. I didn't really have this on my radar, something I knew I wanted to read one day because I thought I had moved past kind of this age range. It doesn't feel super, I actually don't even know if this is teen or if it's adult, because the people do grow, they age throughout the story. Whatever it is though, it didn't feel too youthful, and I would recommend this to people who enjoy this type of story. So thank you, the channel member who suggested that one. We are now in a positive trajectory for continuing the members TBR jar for 2024, because I need to read more wins than losses, and I've had a good chunk of losses, but I think success is imminent. Next comment. Since I recently did a video of what people have DNF'd and finishing their DNFs and telling you if you should finish the book, I want to go with this comment. Are there any books you think are worth pushing through a DNF? This might be a controversial opinion because I also said this about a book I feel similarly about, which is Daughter of the Moon Goddess, but I'm gonna say Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong, because this takes a while to get into. It is a very slow build for the first third, and then I love where the story went, just like with Daughter of the Moon Goddess. But what I've said to so many people is I almost DNF'd Daughter of the Moon Goddess in the first half. I almost DNF'd this in the first third as well. There was just a lot to learn, and I didn't really feel in love with any like of the characters or the plot so far. I was just learning a lot, and it was generally interesting, but it didn't captivate me. And then once we really got into the character development, I fell in love with this book and gave it 5 stars. But I know that I said that same thing about Daughter of the Moon Goddess last year, and a lot of people are like, that book is not like the greatness that so many people say it is. And I feel like the same thing is going to happen with Immortal Longings. I think this is going to be lacking for a lot of people, people who read a lot of fantasy and are hardcore fantasy fans. I don't think they're going to feel super satisfied by the magic system and the explanation of everything and the world building. And then for people who love fantasy romance and read a ton of that, that's like really explicitly romance, I don't know if this will satisfy them either, though it is like the focus on these 2 characters and their love story. But for me, this really just ended up being perfect. I fell in love with it, and it's kind of a retelling of another book that I read. And I don't know if I can attribute my enjoyment of it to Antony and Cleopatra and my reread of this, but when I did stop at a third of the way in, I went and reread the play. That's why this video is late. That's why my reading bled a little bit into August, is because I stopped this, I ordered this, I read it, I loved it and gave it 5 stars again. And then I finished this and loved it even more. Though I wouldn't say it's a direct retelling. It's obviously inspired by it. We have Antony and Cleopatra, and in here we have Anton and Calla, and they are clearly the embodiments of these characters. And I think Chloe Gong wanted to explore their obsession with each other and their dynamic and just put it in here. It doesn't feel like a retelling because honestly, when I was reading this, I thought it was a standalone, so I was expecting a very different ending, and then I loved the ending so much, and I think it's such a perfect setup for the trilogy that it's planned to be now. And maybe once the trilogy is done, it will feel like a retelling, because there's just a lot more that goes on in here, and especially like the ending and the tragedy of it all that didn't happen in here, but perhaps as a full series it will. This felt more like a prequel to Antony and Cleopatra, because you don't get to see their initial meeting in the play. It's just a lot of them having memories, talking about, you know, everyone around is talking about how they met and the connection that they had and like what they had done together before. I'll transition into my review of this really quickly, or just like the explanation of what this is. So Cleopatra loves Antony. They are from different worlds. Antony, even though is in love with Cleopatra, ends up marrying someone else for, you know, political gains. A war starts with Caesar. Antony and Cleopatra are still like together. They kind of back down from the fight, and then they have these side dealings with Caesar and try to figure out if they can now trust each other. Antony and Cleopatra are then at odds. Drama, drama, drama. There's fake death, there's attempted suicide, there's real death. And throughout it, you're constantly questioning, or Antony is constantly questioning Cleopatra's motives and her loyalty. She's very smart. She has very clear goals and plans, but she's also very obsessed with Antony, and that clouds a lot of her judgment. She's obsessed with him, but she's also obsessed with control, and she wants to control everything. And just a lot of drama goes on in these pages, and I loved it so much. I definitely wouldn't say you have to read the play to enjoy this, but I do think it contributed to my enjoyment because there's a lot of references and things that you can take away if you have read the play. So a big part of the plot of this is we're in this fantasy situation where people can body swap, and there's a competition. There's just a lot of murder. You have to take people out. There's 88 people who start in the competition, and there's like body swapping in this fantasy world. So you can jump into another body and take it over, and then nobody can like recognize you. There are some certain clues that you can glean to figure out who people are, and then you have to wear this bracelet that indicates that you are a player in the game. And we have the 2 main characters in here who are enemies at the beginning. They become like reluctant allies because they need to work together for certain reasons. They even come up with this kind of code so they know who each other are in different bodies. And it's such a fun parallel because Cleopatra specifically calls Antony like a visual puzzle in this book and talks about how he's her lover but also her betrayer. And I think that is perfectly represented in here because he does so much more body swapping than she does, and she has to constantly like figure out who he is. You also get to explore Cleopatra's dreams in here, and she talks about how she sees something happen that may or may not be reality, and then we got a really similar scene in here. And what's fun is they reference the beginning of their relationship when they first met and how it started out with like play fighting, and they had this kind of banter, the chemistry they had, the relationship that they built, but you don't actually get to see it because we're in like war stuff. And in here you do get to see their first meeting and how everything began. Obviously it's totally different because it's in a fantasy setting and it revolves around this game, and it's also like modern day. But I just love the inner workings of this political system. I loved seeing how they interacted. There's a lot of like impulsiveness that happens in here and just foolishness that these characters get into. And there was a bit in here, but I'm more interested to see how that develops throughout the trilogy. So I will continue to pick it up. This could be my favorite like fantasy series. I don't think it's going to be for everyone. I think it's going to be a pretty divisive one, and everybody who's like going to give it 1 star is going to say, oh, it's overhyped by all these people who gave it 5 stars. And that's me. I'm doing it. I'm saying it. I thought it was great. And I didn't answer a question for this, but somebody did ask a book that you wouldn't want to see made into a movie or show. And I think it's this because I love reading Shakespeare. I don't like watching it. I have never really enjoyed watching Shakespeare as a movie. And I know that's probably an unpopular opinion, but I would not watch the adaptation, and I would not be interested in another one coming of it. I'm more interested in a book retelling the story than a film. Somebody asked, which book would you buy a new outfit to match? And I think that's really fun. I actually am really into like chartreuse lately, / lime green, not just in books but in clothes. I just bought this Anthropology sweater that I can't wait until it's a temperature that I can wear this. It just looks like a big lump, but I love it so much, so I feel like this is definitely my vibe. So we've got A Sliver of Darkness by CJ Tudor and Sucker by Daniel Hornsby. So I'll just review both of these right now. Sliver of Darkness is a short story collection. I gave it 4 stars. I don't really know what to say about it. It's like futuristic. There is some fantastical horror elements. It's like mostly horror, but it leans, you know, paranormal and weird. I did not write down my ratings apparently in the book itself, so I will go ahead and pop on the screen what my favorites were in here, because I know I talked about it in the vlog for Summerween, but I definitely can't remember in this moment, but most of them were like a 4, I think. Then we have Sucker by Daniel Hornsby, which was a 2-star and my least favorite read of the month. I'm not gonna give it a 1 because it wasn't unreadable. Like, the sentence structure was fine. It was just so incredibly dull. So it's a vampire kind of story. It's satire, it's a metaphor. It's just very on the nose as far as like Silicon Valley and the people who take advantage of people and who are doing messed up things for their own gain, and they are like vampires of society. Do you guys remember when the lyrics to Olivia Rodrigo's Vampire were leaked and everybody was like posting the lyrics being like, wow, this is really on the nose. Like, she's not trying to do a metaphor at all. She is just straight up saying, you only come out at night, you sunk your teeth into me, bloodsucker, bleeding me dry like a goddamn vampire. Like, it wasn't subtle at all, and everyone was like, well, this is gonna be so stupid. And then the song itself is actually fantastic. That wasn't the case with this. It feels very on the nose, it feels like a metaphor, but it's just like too obvious. It ended up not being a very good book. It's just like following this guy who you really don't like. You're just following all of his thoughts on his lineage and him running this business and him doing drugs and him having sex, and it is exhausting, like hundreds and hundreds of pages of just his thoughts, and so tiring listening to him talk. And then the plot regarding like the vampires and him finding out about this underground situation and the woman who's running this business based on your blood, like maybe she's actually doing more harmful things than he even realized. It's just like so obvious, and he was just so annoying. And I would have DNF'd it, but I brought this camping and I didn't bring any other books, and I had no service, so I couldn't do like an audiobook. So I just finished it and I regretted it immediately. That one definitely feels like a contender for this comment, which is a book that took you the longest to read, because it felt like I was reading it for weeks. But the book that actually took the longest, I would say there's 2. The Last by Hannah Jameson and The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karen Tilaka. These are both the reason that my reading your suggestions and picking them without knowing what they were that video took like a whole week longer than I thought it would, because these were just kind of slogs to get through. There was such interesting things going on within them, and it was full of such vivid characters, but both of them I gave a 3 at the end of the day because I just lost interest in them, and they really took all of my brain power to finish. Like, when I tell you, you need to have like your brain turned on, you really need to focus on what's happening in here. It's just really dense, but at the same time, it is just so much dialogue. So it almost read like a play. Maybe because it's written in second person, maybe because it doesn't give you a lot of atmosphere and description. You have to imagine everything yourself. And it was just a lot of dynamics in how these characters were moving around each other, and you could visualize it. I could, as a play. So you have this character Maali at the beginning who dies, and he's at like some kind of stage in the afterlife or whatever, where he has the opportunity to take 7 days or 7 moons to like accomplish what he needs to accomplish or figure out what happened to him. He has no memories about how he died or what led up to it. And then he was also working in like journalism, and he had the opportunity to expose something happening in the political sphere, and he wants to accomplish that. So he's following a couple of his friends around, or romantic interest that he had in the book, and seeing how they're reacting to his death, and if they're going to figure out how to expose what he wanted to expose. But then he's also in different timelines and seeing the lead up to his death and what happened to him. He's definitely a flawed individual to follow, and he was really interesting to read about, but none of the other characters really were. I was interested in the kind of social implications that were happening based on the political state that Sri Lanka was in at this time. There's clearly a lot of horrific things going on, and exploring all of those through his eyes was the most interesting part, but it really just lost my interest. I think this is definitely like a good book objectively. I know a lot of people love it. It has won awards. People have gained a lot of things from this, and I like gained enough that I gave it a 3, but it lost me as far as pages. I think it was too long. I don't think the last is too long. I just think it was trying to do too many things. So this is a, I don't know, literary post-apocalypse book. If that's a genre, that's what it is. It feels like it's going to be a thriller. It feels like it's going to be a murder mystery, but it doesn't fully deliver on that. We have this cast of characters who is existing during this nuclear war, and they have been isolated in Switzerland in this hotel from like all of society. They assume like so much of the world is gone and they just need to survive. So it's a survival story. Then there's also this murder that happens when they find a dead body of this young girl in a water tower. And so they want to solve that mystery, but also there's just a lot of all these dynamics among all of these characters. They're trying to find food. They're trying to decide who has power in the group, how to make decisions. And then they're also just like creating friendships and having sex and talking about their pasts. You get to learn about all of them. Some of them are quirky and it like has this fun kind of vibe. But then there's this underlying sinister feeling because you know that somebody killed somebody in the group. And I think I like this dynamic of all of the characters trying to figure stuff out, like who gets to control what, gathering all these supplies. But I like it the most when when the characters know each other at the beginning. So you have this like group of boys dropped on an island, and you get to see how, even though they had the same kind of upbringing, how they have different personalities and how those develop and how conflict arises and how their relationships change throughout their time together in this end of the world scenario. In here, they're just all meeting, and where a lot of them are, and it's just kind of like, who can I trust? Who can I sleep with? And that's not the most interesting plot for me. I didn't love the ending. I think it was trying to accomplish too much, but I also think people out there have liked this, and I would probably recommend it to a certain audience. For me, it was just okay at a 3. Next question is, you have to star in the adaptation of one of these books. Which do you choose? I'm so glad I happen to have Dead 11 right here, because there is a character named Kayla in it, which like I never see. Considering how non-unique my name is, I just feel like it's a name that I should see more in literature. I don't think I have a rare name by any means. So I would star in this adaptation because I think it's a really interesting story. I would love to see how it would be adapted. I would totally watch it. I ended up giving it a high 3. I think it was a little too repetitive. It was a little too long. I feel like it just sounds like I don't like reading and I want the books to end faster. That this one just like really hammered home the same point so many times, because you're following a bunch of different perspectives and you're learning the same like solving of this mystery multiple times through different people's eyes, but it's not like them having their own unique take on it. It's just like you learn the same information multiple times. So the book kicks off with this guy who has a missing sister, and he goes to this island to try to find her because that is where she was seen last, or he knew her to be. And then you're reading her, is it her perspective or is it her journal entries? Now I can't remember. It's like mixed media in that you're also like reading phone calls and letters and emails. But so Willow, the woman who's gone missing, she originally went to the island because she lost her son. He was, I think, 11. And when he died, she found the name of the island like written on his floor. And so she's like, what does this have to do with his death? Why was he like obsessed with this island? Like, what's going on? So she goes there and becomes a part of the community, just wants to learn different things. And then when she goes missing, her brother comes to do the exact same investigation to find her. I know somebody asked about the loss of a child and if that's a lot of the plot. I think grief is such a the central theme of this book that if that's not something that you want to read about at all, like it will slap you in the face a lot with the conversation around grief and how she felt losing her child. But then there's also this like kind of fun goosebumps element of it all. It makes sense that R.L. Stine is the one that blurbed this, where everybody there is obsessed with the year 1994 and a specific day and is like recreating this day every single day. So it's not that the island is stuck in the 90s, it's that people are living as if they're stuck in the 90s. And when you come to realize the reason for that, it is fascinating. It does get like paranormal and weird for sure. It doesn't feel like a horror. I think actually at Indigo, it is categorized just as paranormal and fantasy, but I know I have called it horror and I think a lot of people have tagged it on Goodreads as horror. I wouldn't say it feels unsettling. There are a couple moments of that, but the overall tone of it is not that. It's just this investigation into like why people are doing this and what they're afraid of. Which book were you most surprised by is another one. It doesn't have to be a 5-star, just a wow, this did not go where I thought it was headed. There's not a lot of books left for me to choose from. But actually, I could answer The Haunting of Alejandra for this one. It's another literary horror, and I just have read a few different books about La Llorona and seeing how different authors handle it. This one was really interesting and did not go where I was expecting, like with that haunted figure following this woman around. So in it, we're following Alejandra. She is a wife and a mother, and she feels really, sorry, my battery died. She feels really defined by these titles, these labels, because she doesn't really have a life for herself. She's caring for these 3 young children and isn't getting a lot of help from her husband. And that struggle seems really manifested by this like creature, haunting, shadowy figure that she sees everywhere she goes, and these intrusive thoughts about how she isn't good enough. Alejandra was also adopted, and so she doesn't have a lot of ties to her family. She was stopped from having a connection to her biological family, and she decides to reach out and find that connection. And through that connection and working with her ancestors, maybe they can create this protection, or they can solve these visions and like what's happening to her. And throughout the book, we also get perspective from different ancestors of hers. All, it seems like we're flashing into each of their experiences when they're becoming a mother, when they have a certain moment within motherhood and with identity that they're struggling with. It's really sad, but it's also fascinating. I gave it a 4. It didn't go exactly where I was expecting in a good way, but then it also didn't successfully accomplish like the maybe personal accountability conversation that I wish came into it, and like the decision making involved. It felt like we were following a bunch of women and what was happening to them and how they were responding to it, and not giving each of them a real like mind of their own and an explanation of where they have been and how they got to where they are. I just wanted a little bit more well-roundedness in that area. And for some of them, it makes sense because of the time frame and the situation that they were thrust into. But in certain settings, I just wanted a little bit more like backstory. And I think maybe I would have liked it if it was longer. I guess I don't say very often. I wanted some of these books to be shorter and some of them to be longer. Now I only have a few books here left, and I don't know if any questions really fit. Which cover most matches your aesthetic? I have to pick one. I guess. I mean, this one is covered in books, but this one is orange, and like I love this cover. I've been reading a lot of books with like pigs and warthogs on the cover in the past couple years, and I feel like that is what we're seeing here. Let me review these two first. We've got 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff, who is this woman who wrote all of these letters back and forth between this bookstore in London. She was in America and she got really close to the staff there, and it's just their letters back and forth and like the books that she was requesting, them sharing a little bit of their lives, and her like gifting them things and them saying thank you. It's a really simple like nonfiction collection I know a lot of people love. It's funny how well you get to know some of these characters just through their correspondence. And it's obviously such a short book, but it was really charming. It says charming right in the description. So that's what I would say about it. I gave it a 4. I also gave a 4 to The Beast You Are by Paul Tremblay. This is a short story collection. I know somebody asked, compared to his other books, how this compares. I would say, like, if you read Growing Things and hated it like I did, definitely pick this one up. It is better, significantly better. I don't know how it compares to his actual full-length novels, because something I said in the video that I read this in was like, every single story and every single book that I read from him feels like it's a completely different author. Like, he really does not have a consistent style. Plot, writing, characterization, like everything is so all over the place, and that does make it fun. And I did tab all of my ratings in here. So my favorites overall, I don't know why you would want to know which ones, like as if you're just going to pick this up and only read the ones that I recommend. But the Postal Zone, the Possession Edition, I loved. A couple of these are related to A Head Full of Ghosts, which I know a lot of people love. So read that first, and then this will probably hit even harder. I give so many 4s. The Large Man was a 5. The Dead Thing was a 5. I remember that one vividly. I loved that one. Also, Howard Sturgis and the Letters and Van and What He Found When He Went Back to His House was a 5. There's like fantasy, horror, general weirdness in here. And I didn't write down my last 2 ratings, so I'll have to go back to the video to see what I gave them. I didn't write them in here. It is pricey for a short story collection. I don't think it's gonna like change your life, so maybe wait until the paperback comes out. Ooh, Zuki asked a title you think would work the best as a band name, so now I have to choose. Because I can't pick from the stack I've already reviewed, obviously. I think the Jasmine Throne is definitely a better band name than Do You Take This Man. If I actually had to pick, I might say Sucker, because Sucker is a band name in Sucker. And also Dead 11 just sounds kind of cool, like Finger 11. But we're going with the Jasmine Throne, which is a book that I've really been considering my rating for. I think that I read it at just a bad time. It was in that super long video where I was reading all of these long books that were taking me so much time. I've read this at the tail end of it, and I think maybe my mind was just exhausted. And if I reread it, and once I read the entire series, I might come back to it and enjoy it more, because it has so many elements that I like. We've got a sapphic like relationship, but it is more about their own independent growth. We're following Malini and Priya. One of them comes from like wealth and status, and one is like a handmaiden of sorts. The one who is a princess is trapped in a temple by her brother, and he wants her to sacrifice herself. There's these like political and religious implications. Colonialism is talked a lot about in here, and she refuses to sacrifice herself. But then there's this like magic related to it all. It feels a little body horror, it's nature-based, and the pace of it is also really good because you're constantly learning about the magic system and how everything works, and like the political nature of everything. There are rebels, there's people resisting, but it also is pretty insular and takes place with her in the temple, and it's not like pages and pages of learning. You're learning throughout these different perspectives, and it was enjoyable. I just think I wasn't in the right headspace for it. So I gave it a 3, but maybe it should be more like a 4. I just wasn't the most interested in the plot. I was interested in those 2 characters, but not really anyone else. I don't think anyone got the characterization that made them feel like characters I was supposed to care about. It definitely feels like a 3, like talking about it, because maybe I don't remember enough. Maybe it didn't feel as impactful as I wanted it to. Like, I don't have that much to share with you, so I obviously didn't take enough in. So this is an unfair rating of me, and I might return to it because everybody in the comments of that video said like they love that series so much, and especially certain expectations of how the characters behave also like changes in future books, so I should continue. The last one I have is Do You Take This Man by Denise Williams, which I did give a 2. Okay, somebody asked which cover is the most accurate depiction of the story inside. Here we go. It is a story about these 2 characters and how their relationship begins in the wedding industry. So she is a lawyer, but she also officiates for weddings, which is funny because she's a divorce lawyer. So it's like she loves love and wants to bring people together, but also is responsible for like not splitting them up, but like supports their divorcing. And then we have this guy who is new to wedding planning, and they are both extremely strong personalities. I did not like either of these characters. I can see where they're coming from. Like, they don't want to be vulnerable. They've both been through a lot of stuff in their lives that has made it hard for them to open up and want people to get to know them and also feel worthy of love. And I feel like that's a totally fine personality trait to have. I just didn't enjoy reading it. Like, it wasn't fun to read because these characters didn't like each other. They were talking shit about each other constantly, both outside of their relationship and within their relationship. The only thing they really had going for them was like their sexual chemistry. So that's that kind of enemies with benefits, I guess, situation where they aren't suddenly hooking up because they're secretly in love. It's like they don't like each other, but they find each other incredibly attractive, which is just not a story that I liked reading, I guess, because I wanted them to have chemistry in other avenues. And obviously throughout the book, they decide to be in a relationship, so they do build that, but I never felt it because they were like, even within the third act, when they were like together, deciding to be together, they were talking how strongly they felt about each other, how they were willing to work through all of these things to be together. They were still like talking trash about each other and to each other's faces. These characters were some of the most emotionally mature that I have read in romance. They're very introspective and talked through all of their feelings, but like almost to a fault, because they were telling each other everything they didn't like about each other. And even though that was their insecurity showing and they didn't really mean it, it's hard for me to get on board with the relationship when I have just seen them be mean. I totally get what this was doing and I respect it. I just didn't like it. I gave it a 2 and my romance situation is on a bit of a hiatus. So if you saw me reading romance, me posting any like romance pictures, and you're wondering why I'm not reviewing it here, I do have a romance video in the works that you're not going to see for a little while because I just don't feel like publicly reading romance. It's not that I'm done with romance, it's that I'm reading it like on my own time. I don't want to have to constantly come on here and say the same thing that's like, I get it, but I didn't like it. Like, I want to find my romance stuff on my own, and then once I have, you'll see the video that I'm working on. There's also a lot of other books that I've been reading and I need to like stop posting pictures of them and talking about them when I'm excited, because I know that you're not going to see the video for months. So those are the 19 books that I am telling you about that I read in July, and then like 1.5 of them I read in August. It's getting messy. This video is very late. I'm going to try to keep myself more on track for the upcoming months, and I will see you later. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.